In truth, I haven't been interested. I'd never been interested in doing and editing a journal. It just really hadn't, I have to say, strangely enough, hadn't crossed my mind, except for Signs. Because Signs was always the journal that was in the forefront of my mind as great feminist journal. And so when the opportunity came around, I had just recently gotten to Northeastern, right? I think I'd just gotten there like a year or something. I was finding Northeastern a very amenable place to do feminist work, surprisingly. I mean, most universities aren't, so I was sort of surprised by that. And, I think part of what interested me in doing it, A, was Signs, B, was partnership with you and what we could do with the whole consortium and the greater Boston area and all of that. But also the fact that we had ideas. We had ideas about what to do, that it wasn't just, I want to edit, to edit. It was, I want to do something different with this journal that reflects some of my own priorities as a feminist scholar and activist. What became clear, going to Northeastern was a place that was, as you know, trying to put itself on the map in a big way, in a bigly way, and in a very quick way, and it was, so if any, because look, the reality is it's an investment. The university has to put up or shut up when it comes to something like this. They really have to give quite a lot to make it happen, and they did. And I'm not sure every university would. I mean, I know every university wouldn't do that. I think Northeastern, I don't know if Northeastern would do it again, because it's already reached that place that it wanted to get to. But I think it was, I don't know of how much I really knew that at the time, but I think looking back now, I think, one of the reasons we were able to get such a sort of warm embrace from the university is that it's a university that was trying to be a player, and having the premier feminist journal, on its masthead there, was a feather in its cap. And so I think they were very good to us when we proposed this. From the beginning, I mean, I have to say, I felt very supported by Northeastern, for the work I wanted to do in WGSS. They made it worth my while to come here. They really wanted to invest in WGSS, clearly. And I thought Signs was part of that for them, that they saw those two things linked in some ways. So I think this is what I've done my whole career, build programs and that's what I do. So it sort of felt of a piece. It didn't feel wholly new in that way. But it did, I think, once we got Signs and once I saw how the university was committed to it, I sort of figured we're not going to be one of those places that, has a WGSS program under siege. And we're not, so I think that was a sign of their, the sort of stability. It's not like I think, the leaders of this university are feminists. No leaders are feminists, but I think they sort of feel like this is an established interdiscipline, and Signs is an established journal, and we're going to support these things. There was a sense of, okay, we've got this, wow, that is a different, that puts WGSS on, it doesn't just put Northeastern on the map, it puts WGSS on the map in a very particular way. And I think it really helped us build community in the program, for sure. You got to remember, Signs also sort of saved me at a very vulnerable career point. I was, when I was coming up for tenure at Georgetown, as first openly gay person to be tenured at that university, and I was they were horribly homophobic and anti-Semitic, and I was under terrible attack. And I had this very weird piece published in Signs. It was one of my first publications as a little baby, and it was a very controversial piece, and Signs really had a serious pair of ovaries to put that one out. I mean, I have to give them credit. And I think all of my colleagues, couldn't even, they wouldn't even say the name of the piece. Trust me. I mean, they were appalled by all of it, but it was Signs. It helped cement my tenure case, in some ways, because I think it was so, they saw, yes, she's this weird queer, feminist theorist, and we hate her, but she does publish in these this wonderful journal. So I have an affection for this particular journal that is, goes way back to my youth. Yeah, I think it was great, and I think that was mostly your idea, actually. I mean, I think it was a good idea. I think that, I'm not quite sure why. Maybe the other editors have a story about this. Why it's always been the tradition that the editorial board is drawn from only from their own university. And that there is then a international board, and the twain never shall meet, really, and they're just sort of separate things. So, it seemed sort of logical to do it. Here we are in one of the richest intellectual areas, in the US for academia. There are feminists coming out of the woodwork here. And so it made sense to have a broader community. And there was a ready-made sort of venue for that with the graduate consortium. And so it would just seem very logical, a way to both broaden it and simultaneously build more community. And I think, it's helped to make it a more regional project rather than a project that is just, situated in Northeastern. It's like, yes, it is situated in Northeastern, but these board meetings and these connections make it a broader endeavor. I am proudest of FPIP. I mean, I think that innovation, it reverberates in so many different ways. The Feminist Public Intellectuals Project, it both puts signs out there in the world in a different way, and feminist scholarship out there in the world in a different way. But it also, I think, brings a different kind of readership to the actual journal. So I think it has this sort of circular kind of effect. I hope it does, where we are able to speak feminism in a colloquial voice, and in a public, and engage in public debates in certain ways. At the same time that publicness and that accessibility helps to break down some of the barriers between academia and activism and journalism and public life that are so endemic to the world, and that has troubled feminism forever. The relationship between academia and activism. I mean, to be honest, I can't imagine doing signs and having not done that. I mean, it wasn't, that's what I said to answer your first question. It was the innovation that was the most interesting to me. I actually surprisingly ended up liking doing the regular work of signs more than I thought I would. I knew I would like the public stuff because that's where my heart really is. But I've actually ended up enjoying the sort of more regular work of editing a journal much more than I thought I would. That's an interesting question. One way it's changed my work is I'm doing less of it. I mean, there is no question that the amount of time I spend on signs exceeds pretty much everything besides chairing. So I mean, it is made less. I mean, that's it. I think that it has had a twofold effect. On the one hand, I think it's continued my interest in wanting to do public work. I mean, I see what good public work can do and can be, and so it's further engaged that. But I also think laying eyes on all of those scholarly pieces often makes me think, what's missing? What should I write about that I'm not seeing? What do I maybe want to think about as a scholar after looking at all of this stuff year after year and thinking, oh, either something's great and I want to take it somewhere else that it's not been taken, or boy, why the hell isn't anyone writing about this? Why am I not getting these submissions? Maybe I should do it. Not that I do, but it does make me, sort of take me often in that. So it sort of works two ways. strengthened my commitment to the public work. And also, I think, to work that is accessible. And that doesn't have to be public work, but work that is scholarly and accessible. Because as you know, my biggest pet peeve always, when I read those hundreds of manuscripts, always is that my pet peeve is jargon. It's like, do you really have to say it this way? Because if I can't understand it, that's not a good thing, because I'm not stupid. To some extent, I mean, that is the answer. I mean, to some extent it has. I do see more pieces that I think are straight up, that really are just, and then I breathe a sigh of relief. I read those and say, oh my God, I'm so happy to see that. And I do see, with particularly working with Miranda and working with Andy in terms of editing those pieces, I see us being more diligent in working with authors on that. I mean, I think it is, it's a message that's not just that I needed to get across, not just to the authors, but to us as a team, that this is something we've got to be vigilant about as we edit. I mean, Miranda does such miraculous work, and I think I've added more work for her, but I think that's been the additional work I've added for her, is to say, okay, in addition to making sure people have correct grammar and their citations, and you're making it prettier, you also need to really watch out for this, because it just is something we want to avoid. I think it's tough, because I think graduate students particular are trained in it and they get benefits for it. Really, I mean, we all feel it when we're in teaching graduate students and we hear them go on and on about something, and we're like, what the hell are you saying? And so I think there is a culture that, that still does give benefits and rewards a kind of abstruse sort of language. And it's a hard fight. I think it's a hard fight because they think they're not being smart. They think if they're accessible, that means they're not sophisticated. And by the way, I would say that it goes across. I mean, I said it about graduate students, but I think this goes across generationally. I mean, I'll see pieces by senior people that are just as abstruse as pieces by junior people. And then I'll see some junior scholars who will be like, you know what, I'm going to write something that's just straight up, and they do. One is the insistence on disciplinarity still. I find that it is hard for people to let go of that. I can't tell you how many times I've said to an author, God, this has really got a lot of potential, but you seem to only be speaking to sociologists here. Let it go. Let it go. And they find it hard. Some disciplines find it more or less hard, but I think people really find that hard to do. It's like a life vest, a life that they're holding on to something, and they feel they'll sink if they don't hold on to it in some way. So I think there's that still drives me crazy. I think there's also this sort of rote invocation of certain kinds of terms, certain kinds of assumptions without substantiation. And that's a pet peeve of mine too. So whether it's, every essay has to have the word intersectionality in it somewhere, even if they don't do anything with it, or every essay has to inveigh against white feminism without any definition of what they mean by that, or every, the essays that talk about second wave feminism as if it was this monolithic thing that did X, again, without substantiation. So I guess that, the without substantiation part is something that is actually surprisingly persistent. How many people, well, let me back up. I mean, I want big statements and I want people to bite off a lot when they write a piece for Science, but I want them to substantiate it, and to substantiate it doesn't mean, through some glib notion of empiricist data in that sense, but some argumentation that is believable, so there's still just so many. I mean, I see it every day. so many assertions instead of analyses with substantiation. And again, from all across the board, generationally. And so that is always a mystery to me. It's like, you just can't say that. Where are you getting this from? I mean, I do that all the time. It's like, where's that coming from? Do you have any data to back that up or something? Those are things that continue to drive me crazy. And I guess the other thing, which I've spoken with you about before, is this sort of hesitation. I mean, it's the sort of flip side of that in some ways. It's the sort of hesitation to make bold statements. Again, substantiated bold statements, but bold statements. So, there has been, I think, in theory generally, but in feminist theory too, a sort of, move to the micro and a kind of burrowing in that can be fascinating. Sometimes I read those and it's like, wow, I didn't know, that's really interesting. But I am just personally always interested in larger implications. What does this mean for feminist theory writ large? What does this mean for the movement writ large? What does this say for knowledge, production, blah, blah, blah. And that's, people hesitate. I mean, I think a lot of them have come in some of the special issues. So I think of, sort of the special issue we did on gender and the rise of the global right with my great co-editors on that. And I think number one, we were ahead of the curve on all of the stuff about gender, gender ideology and how it's become a tool of the right and populism and all that. So we got that out there. I think there were almost every piece in that, really they were rigorous. They were innovative. They had different angles on things. They made big arguments. So I think that was, I think they're often in some of the special issues. I think it was also true in the public feminism special issue we had. I mean, I remember a piece, that again, seems like it's small scale, like about Emma Gonzalez, the one on Emma Gonzalez as a public, but what it does is really talk about different ways of thinking about feminist consciousness and activism. So I think of another piece I just loved, not from these issues. It always sticks with me because I just thought it was such an innovative piece. The midwife's, remember that one, the midwife's bag? I don't remember.
Oh, yeah.
But again, I thought it was such an innovative piece because it takes a small thing, an object, a material object, and the travels of the object, and really quite literally unpacks that to make big, bold, innovative, perplexing arguments about a lot of different stuff. So I think it doesn't have to be ones that are necessarily explicitly saying, here's my big feminist argument, but it's often ones that come at things sideways, come at things from a different sort of angle. Some of the pieces we've had that are sort of rereadings of Andrea Dworkin, reading her as a literary critic, or reading her the way in which she uses affect in certain ways. They're interesting. They sort of reframe not just her, but how we think about sort of some of those debates in feminist theory. So there are many of them. I mean, I think there've just been so many, but I do think some of the special issues have really gotten, because they have more thematic, coherence in that way. I mean, is there anything, I don't know if there's anything that was that controversial. I do think, I remember something I tried to do that sort of has failed. So I'll bring it up, which is the idea of people as reviewers reading cross-disciplinarily as reviewers. It wasn't just that I wanted pieces to be interdisciplinary themselves, but I wanted reviewers who were not of a field to be able to review it. Now, why? Why did I want that? Because if the goal is that any intelligent feminist, broad-based feminist should be able to pick up an issue of science and read through it and find things in it in a variety of different spaces, then I wanted reviewers to have that same, to be involved in that process. In other words, one of the differences, of course, now and some of the earlier editors is that people don't read an entire issue in the way we grew up, us old folks grew up doing, right? We'd get, I remember getting subscriptions, you'd get it and you'd read through it. So that's old school, and that's out. That's not going to happen. That's gone. I get that. But the question of, is there a way to get people to engage cross-disciplinarily more, rather than just saying, here's an issue of science, and I see that there's a piece on South Africa, and I study South Africa, so I'm going to read that piece. So what I'm interested in doing is getting people to review that piece on South Africa who weren't necessarily South African experts. But if it was a piece on culture and, the use of performance in, I'm just making this up, but the use of performance in South Africa, let's get a performance studies person who doesn't work in South Africa, but to read that, so that we sort of have this cross-fertilization of, reviewers and readers really trying to actively break down those disciplinary baggage, right? And people resisted it. I failed. People wrote back all the time, this is not in my field. And even if I wrote back and said, I know, but you actually do work on X, Y, or Z that has connections with this in some interesting ways, they didn't want to do it. Now, in some ways, they didn't want to do it because they didn't want to do the work. That's a way to get out of it. Oh, not my field, I won't do the work. But I also think it is about the way the disciplines police and discipline us, that, if you feel unskilled, so you're not going to read that. You feel like, well, I can't give a good, I can't give a fair reading to this piece because I'm not a historian or I'm not a sociologist. And I don't know other ways. I'm still struggling to find other ways to encourage that, because it seems to me an important project. That interdisciplinarity is not just I'm citing all these different people in my piece, but it's more of I'm trying to think of interdisciplinarity more as a sort of fulsome and complete project that is about not just about the production and the reception, but about all those, pieces in between where it comes to, fruition in a journal. I'm not quite sure of why, what goes on with someone. I think part of it is sort of how feminist theorizing has changed over the years. And I think there are we've talked about this before. I think there are fewer and fewer people, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that there are fewer and fewer scholars who consider themselves broad-based feminist scholars, that feel like that is their designation. What are you? I'm a feminist scholar. I think now we mostly say, what are you? I'm a feminist scholar of 19th century English literature. I'm a feminist scholar of something, something, something. And I think we're encouraged to do that. So I think that they're we often have this thing when we're looking for reviewers for something. We say, God, what we need is just, we need your generic feminist scholar who thinks and writes on feminist theory broadly conceived, And, for better or worse, I obviously think a little for worse. I think that genre of feminist scholar is on the decline. When we think of people of some other, people, I think there still are some, I think of someone, for example, like Jen Nash, I think there are people out there who I would put in that broad category and who might define themselves that way. I think very few feminist scholars would define, of course, Butler, would define themselves in that broad-based way. And you've got to define yourself in that broad-based way in order to then say, of course I can review this, because I'm a feminist scholar. You're sending me a piece of feminist theory for a feminist journal. I can do this, but that's not what happens. I think that recently, too many of the burning questions I see is from feminist scholars are how feminism has failed, how bad it is, how warped it is, how partial it is, how blindsided it is, how go down the list, that I see how carceral it is, and, less on like, how the hell are we still here? I mean, my burning questions are like, why patriarchy still? I mean, that's, why male dominance still? Why male violence still? Why this? Why don't they stop? Why don't they just stop? Those are, how do we understand, male investment in brutalizing women? These to me are, they're, I often think in feminism that we believe if we've lost or if we haven't won something, that's necessarily means we're wrong. I think it just means the enemy is strong. I don't necessarily, so I think there's an endless tendency for us to look at the moment we're in, the horrors of the moment we're in. I saw this immediately after Roe fell. Roe falls and we start saying, Jesus, if RBG hadn't done this, if we hadn't gone for, it's like, really? Maybe the bigger question is, why do men want to control our reproductive lives? And why do they keep doing it? And what, but actually there was so much we have failed. It's not to say we shouldn't be. Look, the revisions of feminism and the critical impetus of feminism is vital, of course. But there is a waiting that to me is bizarre. Like Roe falls after decades of right-wing male-led movements to kill it. And what we do is talk about feminism's failures. So the idea that the loss is a sign of our wrongness, rather than the loss is a sign of the power of masculine dominance, is a weird trajectory to me. That has been rewarded in the popular, this is an interesting question. You look at some of the big books that have circulated around, of late, of the last 10 years or so, as public feminist books. And a lot of these books are about, how bad feminism has failed. There's the anti-feminist stuff. That's another story. But then there's these books that are, all about feminism is carceral. Feminism is racist. Feminism is, the minute the Women's March happened, oh, it was terrible. And, Me Too. Oh, it went too far. So I think the impetus so much in popular culture is to do that it's been hard to push back against. And also, to be honest, I'm not sure how much as an editor I can do that without being too heavy-handed with it. I certainly, I do it in the form of asking for more substantiation and so on. When someone goes on and on about carceral, I'm like, what exactly do you mean? Are there feminists in control of the prison system mostly? Because I don't actually think that's empirically the case, but I get what you're saying. Okay. So I will often do that, but I think that that's in the water now, that's sort of we have brought this on ourselves kind of thing. And there's still some of that old, if we actually name it, oh, we're back to that man-hating, the man-hating lesbian feminist again. It's like, really, that's where we are. Sometimes I get submissions for signs, and I see curricular offerings in WGSS type programs that seem to me to have zero to do with feminism. I'm more concerned about the sort of ways in which grounding in feminist theory and in feminist questions, which can be about all kinds of things, often doesn't seem the starting point for either submission to a feminist journal or curricular offerings in a WGSS program. And that's where I think we are, that is troubling. So, for example, if you submit a queer theory piece to Science, that all it does is talk about Michael Warner and Leo Bersani and I mean, if that's all it does, and Foucault, and if that's all it does, it's not just that it cites men, but it cites male theory that has nothing to do with feminism, really, in my view, but I'm sure people disagree with some of that. But you could do robust queer theory that is deeply rooted in feminist theorizing and feminist questions. So I do think citation is part of the issue. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said in articles, it's like, oh, really? You're just going to cite the same? It's like, there becomes this rote sort of, let's say, I've got to say the word intersectionality. I've got to quote, I've got to cite bell hooks. I've got to cite Combahee. I've got to cite Butler. I've got to cite, they're like the people you have to do. And if I could break that down, I would. I don't think I've been successful, but I do, it just is nonstop. So the angle I come at it as an editor is to say, where's your feminist question? What's the feminist question here? Where's the feminism of it? And it's just surprising me. And I see it in curricula, in women's, it's like, really, why are you teaching that course? What does it have to do with they can teach that in political science. Why are you doing that in a gender studies program? I do think I would want to say, let your vision of feminism guide everything you do. that is really from the gut in that way, to let that be your North Star, to not just think in instrumental ways, but to think in feminism writ large with that. The other thing I guess I'd say is a smaller thing, which is something I really learned on the job with this, which is, to be open to surprise. I mean, I think that, particularly when you come doing this after, I wasn't young when I started this, and God knows I'm not young now, so that I had years of being a scholar and being in the field and so on. So I sort of knew what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was interested in. And one of the things I had to learn was to open my mind up to possibilities of reading and of enjoying things that were things I typically thought I wouldn't, or particular kinds of methodologies that I might not generally be attuned to. So, part of what you learn, I think, as an editor is that there's not a singular reading mode you have as an editor. So I do think it is that perseverance against because whoever takes up a journal is going to be a senior scholar. And so they're going to have things, that they like and don't like, genres and types of stuff. And I am very, I know what I liked, and and I have found myself having to just say, okay, I'm going to sit with this. And I am, because it does have something going on here, and now it's drawing me in new ways. And to open yourself up to that's been an interesting process, to teach an old dog new tricks. I've been surprised sometimes at stuff I've ended up liking that I thought, oh my God, I want to poke my eyes out with a spoon with this. And then I end up loving it, I don't know. The only other thing I would say, which I would like to be on the record saying, is that science is a team effort. It's, obviously, it is a journal where, the buck begins and ends with me. But it also is not humanly possible without the community we've built with it. And, that includes you, that includes Andy and Miranda and the graduate students and the undergraduate. It is, and of the board. So I do think, we often have the image of a sort of solitary editor, and it's not that process. It's a really collective process. I always know that I can, if I have confusion about a piece, or I'm conflicted, which I often am, that I can say, Carla, take a look, Andy, take a look, Miranda, take a look. And that matters. And that, that we have, the fact that we meet regularly and have this working process, that we're endlessly trying to improve it, and see if there are better ways we can work together and support each other more. I mean, I do feel like it's a community in that way. So for me, there's a contiguity between sort of how I think of WGSS and my role as chair in WGSS and my role as editor, that it's about community.